Sometime around the March of 2010, I was driving to visit my brother who lives in Idaho. It had gotten pretty late, and I admit that I was a bit tired, but not to an extent where I should have pulled over to a hotel for resting. So, I continued driving, ignoring the slight fatigue, and I got to this stretch of road where it was just snow-covered fields on either side of me. This was before map apps were popular, so I had been given the directions on a physical map. I checked the route on the map, and it showed that I had to continue driving straight and then take the next right. I drove straight until I got a little nervous. I mean, the piece of the map had a right turn considerably sooner than what I had driven, and there were no rights on the snow-covered road but multiple lefts. Every now and again, I did come across a right, but it was a small, icy road that simply wasn't big enough for my car. I started getting a bit confused about where I was supposed to turn because I'd been driving straight for about 35 minutes or so, and there was still no right turn in sight. I passed a right turn that was big enough for my car, but it was a snowy road. I figured that was probably the turn I was supposed to make. I took the turn and ended up driving around a snow-covered paved road maze. I ended up lost for about 2 hours before I finally found the small snowy road again. I drove up and found myself at a cabin. Until that point, I was confident that was obviously not the correct right turn. So I threw my vehicle in reverse and went to leave when I saw some light and noticed some movement within my peripheral vision. I looked over to that side, and it was just a large group of people, maybe over 7, standing around a fire and coming in my direction. I froze for a moment. They were still significantly distant, but they were covering ground at a good pace. No matter how happy I was looking at humans after hours of being lost, it took me a while to realize that they weren't coming to help me. In fact, their faces, which were lit up by the fire, suggested the exact opposite. It was already in the middle of the night, maybe around 2:30 a.m., and I was lost in a snow-covered maze. I had been driving in a maze for about 1.5 hours. I was tired, and I had enough for one night, so I drove off. I got lost again, and ended up driving for about an hour in the wrong direction, found a gas station, waited for morning, and rang my brother to help me find where the hell he lived. As you can tell, this was before smartphones and GPS became super prevalent, and I have tremendous appreciation for the advancement in technology. Before map apps, finding routes was not just difficult, it was dangerous. Don't miss out on the bone-chilling thrills. Subscribe now and prepare to be haunted by the horrors that await. It was in the heart of winter, and I found myself on a lengthy journey back to university. The drive stretched for nearly 12 hours, and I was determined to cover the distance in one continuous trip. Despite not being a frequent driver, the initial hours of the journey were delightful, and I made good progress without encountering any challenges. However, after several hours of driving, I found myself in desperate need of a restroom break, and there were no towns in sight. Somewhere in the vast emptiness, I noticed a highway sign indicating the presence of food, gas, and accommodations at the upcoming exit. Grateful for the information, I took the exit and followed the signs for several miles until I reached a roadside diner. The sun had set, casting a shadow over the desolate parking lot. A small child dashed in front of my car, and I managed to avoid any mishap. Feeling a sense of urgency, I hurried into the diner. Upon returning, the waitress greeted me, and I inquired about the child I had seen. Much to my surprise, she chuckled and advised me to pay no mind to it. Perplexed, I returned to my car and noticed that the entire place was shrouded in darkness, both inside and out. It appeared abandoned, as if it were the remnants of a structure left untouched for years. Puzzled by the contradiction between my recent experience and the abandoned state of the diner, I recalled a cautionary tale from a fellow traveler about certain peculiar spots along my route that could play tricks on one's mind. Despite the odd encounter, I tried to refocus on my journey and drove away without stopping for anything. As I exited the parking lot, I glimpsed in my rearview mirror to find the waitress chasing after my car. Though I suspected it to be a figment of my imagination, I pressed on the accelerator to leave that eerie place behind. I decided against refueling at the gas station and steered back onto my intended route. When I recounted the unusual incident to my friend, he mentioned that he had been taking the same route for years and had never come across such a diner or motel. Consulting maps and talking to locals yielded no evidence of the mysterious location. It felt as though I had entered an alternate reality, where this peculiar place existed. Locals shared stories of drivers asking for directions to a place that, according to them, didn't exist, and these travelers never returned. This strange encounter left me with a disconcerting sense of uncertainty, causing me to question the fabric of reality and the existence of enigmatic places that defy rational explanation. I was on the road during a small snowstorm and had been driving for about 8 or 9 hours already. I say small snowstorm because it was much more snow than a regular snowfall, but not as much as a typical blizzard you'd probably imagine of a normal snowstorm. I was delivering a few pallets to a warehouse for the company I worked for, but I was ahead on time, so I didn't feel any need to go quickly, especially not with the snowfall. I was on a dimly lit interstate and had my brights on when I could see in the distance a flashing and flickering light. Getting closer, I realized it was much larger and brighter. It was a deep red, and that's when I realized it was a fire. The snow falling down made it too difficult to tell if it was on the highway or off to the side. But either way, I was gaining on it fast. I tried to brake slowly, but I had completely misjudged how close I was, so I pressed down harder. I felt the back trailer starting to slide behind me, and I immediately let go of the brakes, causing it to straighten, but jolt back and shake the whole truck. It was terrifying, trying to keep the truck from tipping over and not slide into the fire. Closing in on it, though, I realized it was off the side of the road, and while it was a relatively large flame, it seemed to be centered in a single spot. I was able to get the truck to stop safely on the side of the highway as I leaned over and looked out the passenger window at the tree line next to the road. I could barely make out a small car at the center of the flames. I was in awe at the sight, never having seen anything like it. I quickly undid my seatbelt and got out to see if anyone was hurt. Staying a safe distance away, I tried to look around the scene for anyone. I didn't know how it could have caught on fire, and the car seemed pretty normal. Aside from the burn marks, it kind of looked like a regular parked car, not damaged or anything from any sort of crash. Not seeing anyone nearby, though, I feared the worst, that someone may be inside the car. I pulled my phone out and called the police. I was thankful to have enough service to get a hold of them, but they were 15 minutes out, and firefighters and ambulances were even further out. The more I stood there in the cold waiting for the police, looking at this huge flame coming from what seemed like any other car, I started wondering if it was intentional. Now I'm no detective, but it just didn't look like an accident in any way. My body shook at the thought, and I turned around to get back to my truck. "Hey, hold up!" a man called out from beside me, maybe 30 feet away but was masked by the falling snow. I looked in that direction, my heart starting to race as 2 men walked up to me. They were wearing face masks covering their mouth and nose. I greeted them and asked if they knew about what happened here, and they both shook their heads, which was really odd considering I didn't see or hear them pull up in any car. There was no way they walked here in the middle of nowhere on a highway, so I obviously started getting a really bad feeling in my gut. I said, beginning to walk, trying not to seem afraid. "No one," one of the men said strictly. I turned back around, and in that moment, I faced the most terrifying thing in my life. The man had a handgun pointed right at me. I told him I would comply with whatever he wanted, and then he told me to move and stand against the trailer. He aggressively patted me down, taking my wallet and phone while the other man robbed whatever he could find in the front of the truck. I was trying to hold in tears as I was thinking about my family and how this might be it for me. I was almost sure that they had lit that car on fire, meaning they likely robbed someone just like me, and I didn't see anyone else around, so we all know what that probably meant. After a minute, the second man reapproached us. He put his hand on the man's shoulder who was holding the gun and leaned in, whispering something in his ear. Then, just like they came, they both rushed into the dark, disappearing through the thick snow. I was in shock. still standing against the truck before running inside and locking the doors. I didn't have my phone or wallet, so I just stayed and waited for the police to arrive. This whole thing was a big deal in the area for a while, though it happened many years ago. The car was set on fire by the two men, and unfortunately, I was right. They robbed an old man who was pulled over and burned the car to make sure no evidence of them was left. They were caught not long after, eventually giving details on where the body was, but they never gave an explanation as to why they went back to the scene when they saw me. It could have been to rob me just as they had done, but it seemed like a big risk for little reward. Most of all, I don't know why they chose to let me live considering what they had just done to the previous victim. I am grateful though, and I hope nobody else has to go through something like that. My advice is that if you see something, just stay in your car, lock the doors, and call the police. Don't go trying to help because there's always a chance that it's going to end up being you who needs help.